Swap to in-game mode on the stream so people can hear us now.
Oh, Keno, do you have a mic?
Of course.
Nice.
Oh, not like a mic item. I see. I've got a
you click
physical
stage
mic.
I think so, anyway.
What did you say?
You can grab a microphone or a laser pointer
Oh, I
in the
see.
items tab.
Oh, cool. Oh, a laser pointer. Sick. Let's see. Is the Smith one blue? Yeah, cool. Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's red, green, and smithed. The three
That's
colors.
If the music is loud, guys, you can go into your music and sound settings and turn down the jukebox/note blocks slider.
Yep.
All of the music around Summit uses that volume.
Y'all should make the server Java and Bedrock. It would just not be feasible. It's also a Java map making showcase, so it'd be
Of course.
a little suboptimal, I think, for Bedrock players, because they wouldn't be able to actually do anything with any of the booths.
Alright, we're gonna get started in like a minute once the song's over. Everyone, if you can get your seats. Alright. We're gonna get this presentation started. I will be introducing Keno to talk about advanced jigsaw techniques. Go ahead and take it away, Keno.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming and seeing what I've got in store here for you. This is, like RX said, advanced jigsaw blocks, advanced jigsaw techniques, rather, otherwise known as pink prints. We'll get into it, I think, right about now. I do have my chat turned off, and I am speaking in both Discord and Simple Voice Chat, but I won't be able to hear you. So feel free to send questions in anywhere, and I'm sure that the Summit staff will be keeping track of those to ask at the end. If everybody's ready, we'll go ahead and get started. Before I jump in, I will just kind of give a quick disclaimer. As the title suggests, this is for advanced jigsaw techniques. And so while we are going to be doing a bit of a recap on some of the basics of jigsaw blocks and jigsaw structures, it really is going to be geared a little bit more towards people who are expected to already have some familiarity with jigsaw structures. Hopefully there'll still be some cool stuff to learn and cool things to see, even if that is kind of new to you, and this can kind of be your kind of awakening moment to get excited for learning more about jigsaw blocks at the more early stage level, for which I have written guides and lots of videos to look at. With that in mind, we'll go ahead and talk about our goals for this run of Pink Prints. Of course, as always, our goal is to reach the antechamber of the manor at Mount Holly. Along the way, we're hoping to learn quite a bit of information if we can draft the rooms that we need to learn it. Ideally, like I mentioned, we're going to be recapping some jigsaw basics, some information about jigsaw blocks and template pools if we can. We'll also learn a little bit how you can guarantee and limit certain structure pieces in a larger, more vast jigsaw structure, as well as how to generate features in a structure, world gen features, which is a great way to kind of flex the creativity and integrate your structure more naturally into a world. And we'll also talk a little bit about how you can manipulate the bounding boxes that jigsaw structures utilize in ways that may not be necessarily intuitive for something that is normally considered to be a limitation. Of course, all this is going to depend on what rooms we draft as we enter Mount Holly, where we'll start, of course, in the entrance hall on rank 1. In this room, we do have 3 doors that we could go through. We've got a door to the west, a door to the north behind this cherry blossom here on the table, and a door to the east. But before we select which door we'd like to go through first, let's take a look at the information here on the table. My name is kanokarob. I'm a World Gen and Jigsaw YouTuber with 30,000 plus subscribers and more than 4 million views. This is still relatively small, but I've built a very following that I'm very proud of people that are excited to learn about jigsaw structures, custom World Gen, and interesting ways to apply them to create awesome and beautiful locations and projects. I started with World Gen and in custom structures in 1.16 when these things were first introduced and opened up to data packs to be able to add to and modify. And in fact, back then, for a little fun fact, adding jigsaw structures was possible, but we had to define them as additional variants of either a village bastion remnant or pillager outpost, because those were the only structures that we could modify and add additions to that used Jigsaw blocks. We didn't have the distinct Jigsaw structure type. So very interesting manner and an example of how Jigsaw blocks and Jigsaw structures and World Gen has expanded in the years since 1.16. On my channel, I have developed data packs like Biome Strongholds, Ominous Mansions, The Fortress of War, as well as many other Jigsaw structure and custom World Gen projects that you can take a look at, many of which you can download and some of which are still in progress. And I'm also an official helper on Data Pack Hub. Both my channel and the Data Pack Hub Discord and wiki and community are both represented here at Smith Summit with booths that you can find in the Patched Plateaus region. So like I said, we're going to go ahead, I think, and start by drafting through one of these doors here in the entrance hall. My thinking is let's go ahead. I'm on the left side, or I guess stage left, house right of the stage here. Let's go ahead and draft to the east of our entrance hall and see what our first three rooms here are. So we've got a bedroom, a closet, or a hallway to select to connect to this east door of our entrance hall. Of course, like I said, our goal is to get up to the antechamber, but we're going to need to gather some information and some resources in order to successfully make it all the way up there. We do have the closet, which is going to be a nice start in theory to get some items. The hallway definitely opens us up and gives us a few more doors to be able to explore these lower ranks here. But I think for now, I'm going to go ahead and start off by drafting a bedroom. Let's go ahead and see what we have inside of here. Of course, besides the bed, a nice dresser and things, we also have some information about Jigsaw blocks. Thankfully, we're going to be able to recap some of this here. So for anyone who is unfamiliar, or just as a recap for people as we gather some foundational information that will help us learn some more advanced techniques later, Jigsaw blocks represent the actual physical connection between a parent structure piece and the child structure piece, the structure piece that generates as you're building out a larger, more maze-like structure. These are always going to be in pairs. You do need a Jigsaw block in the parent structure piece, the first structure piece, as well as in the structure piece that it intends to generate. And the name and the target name between the two also need to be able to match so that the Jigsaw blocks know respectively where they need to connect to. Jigsaw pieces cannot intersect with previous Jigsaw pieces. So when you have a Jigsaw block that generates potentially a very large structure, if an earlier piece of the larger structure at large has already generated that was partially or completely in that space, then that new larger piece isn't going to be able to generate there. It's going to intersect and prevent itself from being able to generate so that it doesn't overwrite an earlier part of the structure as the whole thing kind of expands out step by step. We'll get into an example of that in a moment, but before we move on to that, also just a quick reminder that vertical connections, in addition to horizontal connections, are an option. And for those vertical connections, you have the option to apply some random rotation when you generate that child structure. Now, before we continue on through the Manor of Mount Holly, let's talk about some examples of those Jigsaw bounding box intersections. Oh, that's not correct. We had this working before. Is this the wrong presentation? Okay, well, we're going to ignore that. Never mind. Just trust me that if you have bounding boxes that intersect with another, they're going to fail to generate. So let's go ahead and move on through that door in the bedroom as we draft further up into the Manor of Mount Holly. We've got a few options here. The archives definitely allows us to open up. It gives us several more doors to be able to expand out how we draft our way through the manor. But that negative downside being a red room going to prevent us from being able to see all of the floor plans that we'd be able to draft as we continue. Since we're looking for very specific information as we continue drafting these rooms, that's probably not going to be an option, at least this early in the game. We also have the cloister here, which, though it may not look it, is also a 4-door room, so that would also allow us to explore much more of the manor. But as you can see, it has a requirement of 3 diamonds, and since we're still so early in the game, we don't have any diamonds to be able to spend on that. So really, our only strategic option here is going to be that corner pantry room here, which at least is going to give us some gold. Let's go ahead and take a look here at the pantry and see, thankfully it has cornered and turned us to the right, so that's going to give us some access to the east wing, which is great to see, be able to see more of the house. Let's go over to the counter here and take a look. We, of course, have the 4 gold that we were promised, as well as an apple, which is going to be great for keeping up our energy as we continue to move up the manor. But let's also take a look at that piece of paper we've got on the counter. This is where we're going to get a bit of a recap on template pools. Template pools are, of course, what get referenced by Jigsaw blocks, and these are just a list of 1 or more structure pieces that Jigsaw block is going to be able to generate when it attempts to generate. These are also referenced by the structure itself. When you define a structure as being able to generate naturally, you need to define a start pool, which is just a reference ID for that template pool so it knows what structure it needs to start with, and then from there the Jigsaw blocks within that structure piece take over. Each entry in a template pool has a weight, which just represents the chance that that particular structure is able to generate when this template pool gets called. Higher weights equal higher chance for that to generate. If you've made a loot table before, works exactly the same way there as it does here. And then finally, in a template pool, you can define a fallback template pool. You see up here in this example, we have just an empty one up here, as is going to be the case for most vanilla template pools. But you do have the option to define a different template pool to serve as the fallback in the event that all of the structures that are in this particular template pool fail to generate for one reason or another, whether that's because of bounding box intersections, because of hitting that step limit, or because maybe there aren't any jigsaw blocks, any child jigsaw blocks in any of those structure pieces that are able to connect to the parent that you're able to generate, either intentionally or via mistake. This is a great way, fallback template pools are a great way to be able to guarantee that, example, a hallway is always going to end at a dead end without necessarily making a dead end part of the template pool list that you want to prioritize so that a hallway doesn't end earlier than you necessarily want it to. Let's go ahead and try to go through, oh, nope, looks like our door here through the pantry is locked. We haven't picked up any keys yet. We're still pretty early in the game, so this is very unlucky on us. Looks like RNG gods are not smiling down on us very kindly today. We're gonna have to go back to the entry hall and go through one of these other doors in order to proceed. I think for now, while we could still go north, we want to make sure that we're holding some space open so that we can try and make it up to the antechamber if we get everything that we need to be able to confidently make our way there. So I'm going to save this door for now and go ahead and cross the hall to the west side and see what we can draft over here. So we've got a corridor, which is definitely going to allow us to continue further over to the west wing. We have a lavatory, which is going to be a dead end. This wouldn't be the worst spot for it if we hadn't gotten so terribly unlucky over on the east side over here. So I'd like to avoid taking a dead end right now if we can. Locksmith is also a dead end. Wouldn't be terrible to draft here because that would let us get some keys potentially to be able to go through that locked pantry door. But once again, it does require that diamond, and we don't have any right now. So unfortunately, corridor is going to be our only option. Not a bad one, but I certainly would have preferred to save it for the higher ranks. Let's go ahead and take a look in the corridor here and see what information we can learn. So here in the corridor, we're going to get some information about the selection and placement priority fields that exist in Jigsaw blocks. These are pretty underutilized, especially in vanilla, because they are completely optional. And for, frankly, the wide majority of Jigsaw block and Jigsaw structure use cases, you're not typically going to need them. But if you can leverage them right, they're a great way to have even greater control over how your Jigsaw structures end up getting assembled. These are both optional fields of Jigsaw blocks, like I mentioned, and to understand how to apply them, we first need to understand that Jigsaw blocks get evaluated in descending order depending on whether you're using selection or placement priority, appropriate to whichever one is necessary for that particular step in the generation. They're each applied differently, but regardless, they're defaulted to 0. And as you increase that number, as you define a higher integer for either the placement or selection priority, that's going to mean that all the Jigsaw blocks at those higher priority levels are going to get randomly generated or determined to randomly generate between each other before they move on to the next lowest priority number, and so on from 3 to 2 to 1 and down to 0. Selection priority determines the order, the priority in which that Jigsaw block or those Jigsaw blocks in a given structure piece in a given step are going to attempt to generate a child. And then the placement priority is going to determine the priority in which the order in which Jigsaw blocks in a child structure are going to attempt to connect to the parent Jigsaw block that is generating it. The placement priority is pretty straightforward in terms of how it's applied. If you have a structure piece that has potentially multiple entrances into it, you can make it just more likely that one particular entrance in there is going to be utilized if it has the space, and then if it's not, then it can use one of the other entrances if the bounding box intersection would occur, for example. Selection priority is much more useful in a wider variety of situations because it's going to allow you to specify for a particular jigsaw block that you want to have either a higher chance or indeed a guaranteed chance to generate without later pieces potentially preventing it from being able to generate, creating that bounding box intersection that might prevent something that you intend to be, if not guaranteed, at least extremely likely or extremely high priority. This is an important step in the process of creating the guaranteed chance for a particular piece of a larger jigsaw structure to be able to generate, is being able to specify that a particular jigsaw block in one structure that has many potential exits to generate out of it is going to generate its structure first before it gets blocked. Let's go ahead and continue down the straightaway corridor here and see what our next options for rooms are. Guest bedroom would not be terrible here. It is a dead end, but it's quite a nice dead end. And over here in the corner, great place to stick a dead end if you are needing to get them out of your pool for later. But between the parlor and maid's chamber, these two are going to just give us more options to move through the house some more. Maid's chamber, being a red room, it does have that negative element there. It's going to make it less likely for us to find items lying around in our house. And since we already don't have any keys, but we have a locked door, we've been seeing a lot of diamond rooms, but don't have any diamonds, I think maid's chamber would be very negative for us to take here. But the parlor is going to have a puzzle in there where we're going to be able to, as long as we solve it right, get some diamonds that'll help us move through the house some more. So I think, although guest bedroom wouldn't be bad here, I'm going to go ahead and take a parlor. We can go ahead and take a look in the parlor here. Before we solve that puzzle, let's go ahead and check the desk by the fireplace here and see what information it has for us. This is where we're going to learn about list pool elements. This is a, I think, extremely underutilized element of template pools, or feature mechanic of template pools. It is used in vanilla, but extremely sparingly, and I haven't seen it used a lot elsewhere, especially to its full capacity. So a list pool element is simply a type of entry you can include in a template pool that, instead of placing just a single structure, you can define a list of structures that will all get placed sequentially, all in the same spot. If they're the same size, if they are, even if they're not the same size, they're going to be generated with the same rotation. And if they are the same size, then that also means that any jigsaw block connections between them are going to be maintained. And we'll get into sort of what that means a little bit closer in a moment. The important thing to keep in mind, in addition to the elements, all those structure pieces getting rotated the same way, is that only the jigsaw blocks in the first listed element are going to be evaluated. That means only the jigsaw blocks in there are going to be used to determine where and if it can connect to a parent structure, and only those ones are going to be able to generate further child structures. So when you have a list pool element, all of the later ones don't need any jigsaw blocks. They don't even need jigsaw blocks to help align them with the first element in the pool, but only that is, a limitation to keep in mind. But also something powerful that you can leverage as you expand how list pool elements get applied. This is an example of one from vanilla. This one is used in the ancient city for one of the camp structures. And basically here it's just used to make it so that it places different structures, different parts of the camp structure as it sort of ends up looking without, while applying different processors, or at least the same processor in a different way to each step, so that the final resulting structure piece looks a little bit different every time. This is a fairly complicated way to do something that is easy to do with a processor, but adds just that extra layer of variance. However, I would say that this is a pretty basic example of how you can apply list pool elements to a more sophisticated structure. Other examples of where list pool elements get used in vanilla is for pillager outposts, where it places an additional element after the main tower that is used to apply some extra mossiness to that tower. Again, that's something that really could be done with a processor, so it's a very simple example of what can be a powerful tool. To understand how it's a powerful tool, we need to hopefully draft another room. So let's go ahead and solve the chest puzzle here. Doesn't matter how, we're going to ignore that. Just assume that I'm good at logic puzzles so that we can get those 2 diamonds up in that top corner and move on to draft through that new door. We've got a closet once again that has showed up in our pool again. It would be really great to get dead ends out of our pool, but I'm eyeballing that garage over there. The locksmith is nice. It's going to allow us to buy some keys potentially over there, but the garage gives us 3 keys for free, plus is a pretty powerful room as we continue to expand the Manor of Mount Holly. They both require a diamond requirement, but thankfully we just got some from our parlor puzzle, so let's go ahead and draft a garage. We're not going to be able to open the garage, but we can look in here to see and learn how we can apply list pool elements to create variant structures. Now, this is something that doesn't really have a technical word for it. It's not something that is well defined. It's more how I'm referring to an application of list pool elements. So because list pool elements allow you to place multiple structures in sequence, and they're all going to place while only that first one has the jigsaw blocks evaluated, you can utilize it and leverage it to make it easier to combine the consistent base structure with multiple potential variants and configurations of the jigsaw blocks that would be inside of it, without duplicating the entire structure, the entire build that might be more complicated, that you might plan on making changes to in the future, and so on, which can allow you to create much more varied configurability, in particular of those high selection priority jigsaw blocks, to allow you to guarantee particular structures without it always being in the same place whenever that structure build gets generated, thanks to the list pool element. It's great for, therefore, maintaining that illusion of randomness even when, if you only had one variant, only one configuration of those jigsaw blocks, there would be essentially no randomness with where that high selection priority jigsaw block gets placed. A great example of this is trying to place end portal rooms in a stronghold. If you only want one end portal room, but you also want the starting piece to be that starting staircase, well, the only way to do that in vanilla with the jigsaw block configuration and capability that we have available to data packs right now is by having a guaranteed template pool that is either able to generate that portal room or a room that is on the way to the portal room, which means you have to have that consistent chain. But if you don't want that chain to always be in the same place, you can use variants of those jigsaw blocks. There's a lot of examples, a lot of smaller examples, but if you want a really massive example of a way to apply this, all of these different jigsaw blocks are all across a variety of individual structure pieces that represent the first element in a template pool, in a list pool element. And then on top of each of these, I would overlay the exact same build. So this way, although it looks really complicated, I only need to build the thing one time, and I can just modify the individual jigsaw blocks, in particular, the jigsaw blocks that I mark with emerald and amethyst and diamond blocks, to be able to configure where I want those different entrances and exits to be able to go. This is on the extreme end of being able to apply this. If the pillager outpost and the ancient city is like the really basic end, this is the far other side of the spectrum. There's a lot of range and space in between these that are not quite as intimidating, I promise. Now, going back into the garage, we do have those 3 keys that we were promised, so we can go ahead and grab those and then head back to that pantry door that we had on the other side of the house and see if we can unlock that to get into some better rooms here. We've got that lavatory showing up again. Kind of makes me wish we had taken that earlier, but I think we wouldn't have learned, especially it would have been much more difficult to be able to get that garage to learn about variant structure. So I'm very glad that we didn't take it then, but it does suck to see it here now, especially because it really would be nice to be able to get at least a couple more rooms over on this side of the house. Maid's chamber would allow us to do that. Locksmith is another dead end, so although once again we'd be able to get some keys from it, we thankfully now have 2 keys from the garage still left over. So, I mean, with 2 keys, 1 diamond, 4 gold, it's a risk, but I feel comfortable taking that Maid's chamber and just maybe denying us some items later on in the run. If we can get lucky enough to get the rooms we need, we should still be able to make it to Antechamber. It's not that far a walk. Let's go ahead and hop into the Maid's chamber here. Pretty quaint, pretty simple. We've got most of it being a red room with a bit of a purple room here. Don't have any real synergies for that, but nice to keep in mind for later. Let's go ahead and take a look at what we can learn in here. So this is where we're going to pick up some information about feature pool elements. This is how you're going to be able to generate world gen features as part of your structure. These are super useful for adding things that you could apply as builds, but if you want to utilize features for even more randomness or just to look more natural, they can be a huge help and a huge time save, especially not having to deal with additional jigsaw blocks that you have to name and keep track of and randomize if you're doing variant structures and things like that. So a feature pool element, quite simply, is just an element type in a template pool that lets you reference a placed feature file. They allow you to place things like trees and patches of grass and even more complicated feature elements like template features if you wanted to do crazy weird things in your structure, again, without having to deal with jigsaw blocks. The nice thing about these is that feature pool elements, regardless of how big the feature is, even if you're placing like a mega jungle tree, the huge 2x2 trunks with the wide leaves, the implicit bounding box for that particular structure in the larger jigsaw structure, as far as like taking consideration bounding box limitations and things, is just a simple 1x1x1. So really helpful to not block you off, especially if you do want to generate those really big features like trees or template features and things like that without dealing with the potential fallback and downfall of the bounding box intersections. This is an example that is not in vanilla that I just pulled from one of my projects, but as you can see, it's just a simple, you define a feature pool element for the type instead of a single pool element or list pool element, and then you would just reference that placed feature file. This one may or may not work if it were to be referenced exactly like this, because the pale moss patch might have a height map, for example, that it gets projected to. So if this is an underground structure, perhaps it's not going to apply in exactly the way you want. So always be prepared to make your own placed feature file to utilize these to their fullest potential. But having that potential at all is extremely powerful. Let's go ahead through the maid's chamber door, which is locked. But like I said, we got those keys for a reason. We banked on those keys from the garage. So this is really not a problem for us. We are running low on keys, but we can go ahead and take a look at what we have to draft next. We've got that closet and guest bedroom coming back up again. Again, it would be nice to get rid of these dead ends, but greenhouse is super critical because that's going to have a very important tool for us to be able to get to the antechamber. Or really, this is the first opportunity we have to get that guaranteed antechamber access. So even though it costs our last diamond, I think we can't afford to pass it up. It is a dead end as well, but it's going to be super useful for us. Let's head into that greenhouse and see what information it has here. Oh yes, so of course if you're making feature pool, if you're utilizing feature pool elements in a template pool, you do need to know how feature pools get applied via jigsaw blocks. You need to set up jigsaw blocks in a very particular way in order to use those template pool elements. So importantly, first off, they have to be placed vertically and upwards. They also, at least currently, must have a target name, not the name. The name doesn't matter, but the target name does need to be Minecraft bottom. This is a very minor thing, but easy thing to miss with the current way that feature pool jigsaws are kind of documented right now. The fortunate thing is, in 26.3, as you can see, that's going to be completely removed. They still need to be vertically upwards, but the target name won't matter at all. So you can name them whatever you want. But if you are developing in 26.2 or earlier, make sure to keep that Minecraft bottom target name in mind. And then lastly, they have some weird and different interactions and behavior with whether the vertical jigsaw blocks, remember it does need to be vertically upwards, is set to aligned or rotated. So for most use cases, it's going to be recommended to set that vertical placement to rotated instead of aligned. This is because if you do set it to aligned, it's only going to even attempt to generate the feature pool, the template pool that has that feature pool element, if it is rotated, if the entire structure, and therefore the jigsaw block, is rotated the same direction that it was saved in. So kind of weird to like conceptualize and visualize, but it basically is just going to mean 3/4 of the time, because jigsaw structures necessarily have random rotation applied to them as a result of that starting structure getting randomly rotated. 3/4 of the time, your feature pool element is not going to generate at all. Whereas if you set it to rotated, that's not going to matter at all. It's always going to successfully attempt to place that placed feature. And then it's just in the hands of however you set up your placement modifiers. Yes, so that should be all we need on Jigsaw, feature pool jigsaws. We'll go ahead and pull the lever here in the greenhouse that thankfully is fully operational for us, so that we can go ahead and open up that south antechamber door. So now we can go ahead, we are all set to return to the entrance hall and go through that north door and try and hope that we can make our way to the antechamber. We have to draft rooms to get up there first. And first off, our 3 examples that we have here, Cloister showing up once again. We no longer have any diamonds, but even if we did have those 2 still wouldn't be enough for that 3 diamond requirement. Very expensive room there. Great Hall is looking pretty nice. It would be a 4-door room, so even though this right door, this west door, would be blocked, we could go into this east door if we wanted, except it has 7 locked doors. We don't really need to go into that east door, but we do need to go north, and we still have 1 more room to draft to get to the antechamber. So we'd rather not use that last key if we don't have to, just in case we're going to need it 1 more time. The Great Hall's always going to be locked, but that hallway north door could be unlocked. So I think for safety, we're going to go ahead and go with that hallway door. Looking through the hallway, we do have, it looks like a security door over there on that west side. So even if we wanted to go through there, we don't have any way to get through a security door. That's going to take a little bit more than a key. So our only choice is to go north, but thankfully that's exactly the direction that we want to go. Before that though, let's go ahead and learn a little bit more about bounding boxes and really how you can manipulate them, how you can take advantage of what would, again, like I mentioned before, typically be a limitation. It's a limitation we've come across a few times as we've learned about some other features. But because bounding boxes can't intersect, you can intentionally place jigsaw blocks so that they would intersect, but set them to that same selection priority to further randomize whether it's going to generate either the template pool or the feature pool from, template pool, from one of the jigsaw blocks or from the other, without needing to make a whole separate template pool or needing to add extra jigsaw blocks if maybe they're facing different directions. If one of them is a vertical connection and one of them is a horizontal one, you can just really maximize the amount of randomness and variety that you can apply to a structure by taking advantage of the fact that if one of those structures gets placed, if one of those structures that is facing into the same location is successful, then the next one's just going to fail automatically. You don't have to worry about it, and it'll be random which one each time as long as they're that same selection priority. Now, once again, that security door on the hallway is locked, so we need to go ahead and go through that north door, and this one is locked as well. But fortunately, we do have that key, so we still can hold out hope that as we go ahead and draft this room, we're not going to have any problems getting to the antechamber, getting to the end of our run here. Now, let's see what rooms we have to take a look at. Lavatory, or rather spare room, is our only way forward at this moment. Chamber of Mirrors is not technically a dead end. It sort of is, it sort of isn't, but we certainly can't take advantage of it here. We'd have to open this door and then find a way all the way around to open a different door and then all the way up. There's just no way that we can do that with the space that we have available right now. So and of course, lavatory, once again, is a dead end. We've been seeing it time and time again. It keeps coming up against us, but fortunately, spare room is coming in to save the day. So let's go ahead and draft that spare room. Hop in here. We can see the antechamber just dead ahead, but before we make our way over there, let's go ahead and talk some final tips and tricks for using jigsaw structures and advanced jigsaw techniques. Now, this isn't necessarily advanced in itself, but if you are making jigsaw structures, I do recommend including both a name and a target name for all of your jigsaw blocks. This isn't technically required. A parent jigsaw block, a jigsaw block that is only ever going to generate something, only technically needs a target name, and same for a jigsaw block that's in a child structure that's never going to generate something of itself. It only needs a name so that it knows what target name jigsaw block it needs to connect to. But naming both and keeping them consistent between parents and children is a really useful way to just help you mentally keep track of which pieces are supposed to connect to each other and where. It's also really useful and necessary, of course, for jigsaw blocks that can be both parents and children. And in fact, is a really useful way to make it so that a particular jigsaw block can look like an entrance, in the player perspective. If it's a T intersection hallway, for example, if you want one of those exits out of that room to only ever be an exit but never an entrance, you can just name it something that will never connect to the target name jigsaw block that could connect that structure, while the other two can have an appropriate target name that would match. I also recommend simplifying common decorative elements into smaller structures that you can place with a jigsaw block. This is, once again, a really useful way to add more and more variety and randomness to your structure so it doesn't feel quite as scripted every time a player enters the structure. A great example of this is decorated pots. You could just place a few decorated pots in every room and you can put them in a few different places in every room, or you can spam a whole bunch of jigsaw blocks in all of your rooms that have a small chance to generate a small little decorated pot structure element. And then because of the very small chance for it to successfully generate, if you use an empty pool element to add that kind of chance for it, that high chance for it to generate nothing, then you can have the same illusion of the decorated pots being placed randomly, but they will actually be placed randomly. They'll be placed kind of organically throughout the structure without you needing to kind of fake it being organic, if that makes sense. And then lastly, this isn't really a tip necessarily because we didn't really talk about them too much. I consider these kind of intermediate, but if you aren't already familiar with processors and leveraging processors to add not only randomness, but also just more control over how your jigsaw structures are put together and the kinds of blocks that can appear in them, get familiar with them. They are so powerful and simplify quite a lot of what would be just like building parts necessarily as you are creating structures that you want to feel lived in and organic and interesting to explore. A great example of this is, normally you're going to use a processor to apply some random variety to the blocks that appear in that structure with a simple ruled processor type, but you can actually do a capped processor type to make it so that regardless of whether you have a guaranteed or a chance, there's only a certain number of a particular block that you can have in that structure that gets placed by that processor. This is how suspicious sand works in the trail ruins, suspicious gravel rather, works in trail ruins. They use a capped processor type to make it so that each structure piece is only able to have only one type of suspicious gravel, that's a really hard word to say, that has a really valuable loot table inside of it when you brush it with an archaeology brush. And then there could be 3 or 5 or 10 that have a more normal kind of basic loot table inside of them. So it gives you a lot of control that you can really explore and expand upon beyond just the very basic, oh, I want 50% of the cobblestone to be mossy cobblestone. So learn to get familiar with processors because you can apply them in a lot of interesting ways. And with that, we can finally enter the antechamber. Although it doesn't seem like there's anywhere to go in here. I'm not sure what we're supposed to... Oh no, there's another key here? What am I supposed to do with that? Thank you so much for watching, and play Blueprints. All right, I'm going to go ahead and turn chat back on, but I'm going to stay quiet in simple voice chat, and then we can go into questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kano. I've also have a document I will hand it to you. A couple questions I've collected.
Great.
I can read them out to you, or you can go through them yourself. Up to you.
You can go ahead and read them out to me.
Cool. Is this blueprint concept a map or anything playable?
No, it's not. It would be really cool to work on in the future. But if anyone has ever played Blueprints, I'm sure you can even just begin to imagine the amount of complexity and time and work that would go into even a very basic recreation of it. But it would be pretty cool to see in the future.
It does sound pretty awesome. There's a question here. Do I need a data pack or anything to use jigsaw blocks?
Yes, so that is an important thing with jigsaw blocks. I suppose like technically there's ways to utilize them with only, well, actually, is there? No, I don't think so. Yeah, you do need a data pack because at the very least, if you want to utilize Jigsaw blocks in any meaningful way, you at least need template pool files. You at least need those JSON files, which does require a data pack. Whether you're doing natural structure generation or you're using it with like just commands, whether it's command blocks or you're using the place jigsaw command or whatever, you do need at the very least a template pool element file to be able to control what structure gets placed if you utilize jigsaw blocks in any meaningful way.
Sense. I think it's the bounding box question. How do I ensure that when trying to create a larger room in a complex structure, it isn't always obstructed, it doesn't fail to spawn?
So again, the only way to really do that is using that selection priority. It does, in tandem with that, we didn't really talk about it necessarily, but it does, require a certain amount of intelligent placement and sizing of the parent structure as well, and where that jigsaw block that's going to generate that, in this case, a guaranteed piece, so that it doesn't get obstructed by the structure itself, or by other steps or structures that have the same selection priority that might be elsewhere in the branching structure. So, there's still a certain amount of, intelligent design that needs to be put into that, and thoughtful strategic design, if we go back to the blueprints, with how you place them in the jigsaw blocks in particular. But ultimately, it's going to come down to you have to use that selection priority that is higher than everything else to make sure that it gets placed first before something else has a chance to get in its way.
Very interesting. I had that question too. So, uh, this might also be related. The next two. Can you make it that so certain parts of your jigsaw don't spawn next to each other? And then a follow up. Like, can you make certain guarantees of your dungeon generation? Like, for example, if you want one gold room and one shop room to appear on like opposite sides of the dungeon, or make sure that they always
Right.
appear.
So that ultimately is going to go back to kind of utilizing several of the mechanics that we talked about. And in particular is where I would particularly take advantage of the variant structures and list pool elements. The only way to really do that is again, by having in your starting structure, for example, say it has 4 jigsaw blocks that are able to generate out, and continue to branch out from it. If you do like the gold room and the pink room or something, one of those jigsaw blocks you need to make always and only able to generate either that gold room or a further structure piece, branching piece that also includes a jigsaw block that's only able to generate that gold room and so on, and a different jigsaw block back in that starting piece that's exactly the same way but for pink. It's a little complicated. It's unfortunate that that's the way that it has to be done, but at least with the current technology, that is what you have to do. And as you get used to it, and especially again as you leverage those variant structures, you start to it becomes second nature almost. Like I'm working on a project right now where I almost had to like stop myself from doing variant structures because it wasn't necessary, but it just felt so natural because it's just like, well, if I want this to be something different in this particular place, I might as well just do this. And it wasn't necessary in that case, but that is an example where I would take advantage of it.
Interesting. Should this is in reference to the target name discussion. Do they need to be the same, or are there instances where you prefer to keep them different?
So they don't need to be the same, like within the same jigsaw block. Like a jigsaw block that is going to generate something doesn't need to be named, Minecraft room and also target name Minecraft room. But when you have a jigsaw block, like in that example, that's going to generate a room, the target name of the parent jigsaw block needs to be Minecraft room. And then the name of the jigsaw block in that child structure also needs to be Minecraft room. And in that example, as a convenience and a way for at least me to help kind of keep track of things and remember and mentally understand and conceptualize how they're going to connect to each other, I would name the parent jigsaw block Minecraft hallway, for example, and set the target name for the child structure Minecraft hallway, even though neither of those are going to get used, just to kind of help me keep track. but it's certainly not a requirement. If you find it easier to keep those blank and only make use of the target name in parent jigsaw blocks and the name in child jigsaw blocks, if that's easier for you, you should always do that. You should always do what is the simplest for you to conceptualize.
Ooh. Do jigsaw blocks share a lot of the same properties in Bedrock? If they differ, how so?
They do actually, yeah. Jigsaw blocks, I believe, from what when I last looked at how they work in Bedrock, are pretty much the same. I don't think there's any significant differences there. They may or may not have selection and placement priority. I don't recall that. But as for everything else, they can, or they are. The main difference is that I believe, at least last I checked, Bedrock does not have list pool elements. And I think they might not have feature pool elements either. So they're a little bit more restrictive. That might have changed recently. I know there have been a few Bedrock pushes since then and some experimental changes that maybe those features are available, but only in experimental. And so you can't use them in add-ons yet, at least on the marketplace. But last that I checked, I don't think either of those features of template pools are available. But as far as the jigsaw blocks, I think they're pretty much consistent.
Sense. Does a processor use a /fill X% command across the whole structure?
No, I mean that's a maybe useful way to conceptualize it, but it doesn't. It's not just a simple command. It's obviously much more codey than that, programming than that, because it's not a data pack creating that mechanic. It is a mechanic that is made available to data packs by the code of Minecraft. So certainly one would hope it's more performant than that.
Makes sense. How do you make a connective exterior structure? Would you have to make a shell for the room like a pillager mansion?
So it depends a little bit on your goals with the layout of the interior. You could do it both ways. You could place the shell first and then build the interior inside of that. If your interior is more dynamic, then it probably is going to make more sense to have the interior and then place the shell template pool elements outside of that after, as the final step. It's going to depend a little bit on your goals and frankly on the feasibility based on the design of the structure, the layout of the interior. A mansion is a great example. In vanilla, that is basically one big box. That's a pretty consistent size. And so the shell is doesn't need to be very dynamic except for the third floor. For my Ominous Mansion update, I also, found it very, restrictive and difficult to have a more dynamically shaped interior and be able to place those shell walls on the outside. I'm sure it's possible, but because of those bounding box intersections, it's a fair bit more difficult to get right and get consistent. And so I opted to also essentially just do a couple of large boxes.
Makes sense. This is a really good question. How do you effectively play test and tweak these features? Is there a way to see into the decisions you made in order to determine why something generated the way it is? So I think it's both like just working with Origin data packs in general, and then also
Yeah.
like trying to determine like the change you made, like how it actually
Sure.
happened.
So for generally how I play test, and I would consider play testing, I guess, a little bit different than generation testing, because you would typically play test at kind of the end and ensure like the balance of things is right. Whereas if you're just making sure things connect correctly or want to understand how they're connecting, that doesn't necessarily require like going in and playing through and fighting monsters and things. So with regards to generation testing, I just place them in a flat world, use the place command, place structure and stuff, and that makes it generate as it would in the real world, but without obviously the if you're building an underground structure, without the terrain getting in your way. And largely, I try to start simple. I make the like core generation pieces that are necessary first in their most basic form before I start adding variety. Because once I start adding that variety, or rather once I have the base form of how I expect it to generate kind of down, then adding the variety in is much simpler and doesn't require as thorough of testing and checking and making sure things are lined up correctly. Obviously, mistakes still happen, and so that still has to be checked. But that's typically the process that I would go. If I am, for one reason or another, having difficulty understanding, well, why is that generating the way it is? That's actually an example of where I would use a processor to change, because processors can get applied to a particular template pool element and are per template pool element. I can say, well, I don't understand why this piece is generating the way it is, or I'm having difficulty finding it in a more complex branching structure. I would use a processor to just replace all the blocks that are in there, or at least a prominent block in there, with something that's really visible, like red nether bricks or something like that, so that when I go to generate it, I can see, oh, that's where it is, or that it's especially useful for testing like guaranteed pieces and guaranteed branches that might be multiple structures long. I can just change the processor for that entire chain of template pools to all be a very visible block, so I can tell that apart from the rest of the structure and make sure and understand, okay, why is it doing it, and is it doing it right?
That's a really smart tip.
Yeah.
Got a question. New at this, but is there a way to make a jigsaw structure generate at the spawn location of the world?
Yes and no. In 26.2, or as of 26.2, there's a way to make it generate at 0, 0. And the method of doing that is just using the concentric ring placement type in your structure set JSON file, and just making it so there's only, which is, if for those unfamiliar, how strongholds get placed in concentric rings that expand over the course of the world, centered on 0, 0. You can make that so it only generates 1 instead of 128 like strongholds do, and make it so it has a 0 distance, and that'll just make it so it always generates exactly once at the 0, 0 coordinate. But as you know, in 0, 0 is not necessarily always the spawn point based on oceans and valid spawn biomes and stuff. Now in 26.3, they are adding in a way, a different placement type that does allow you to place it at spawn specifically, which is distinct, of course, from 0, 0.
Makes sense. Not sure if I missed it, but is it directly possible to influence, or is it possible to directly influence the probability of a structure generating from a specific pool?
Yes, yeah, that's what the weight field is for. So if you have a template pool that has 2, 3, plus structure options inside of it, you can make the weight for one of them much higher than the rest, just like a loot table, and that one will be pulled more often. Now, you do want to be a little bit careful with this. I will say this is a great opportunity to mention. The way in which Minecraft utilizes that weight to randomly pull one of those structures, let's say, is very interesting, to be polite about it. And so with really, really high weights, it can really bog down the performance when that structure gets generated. So as best as you can, try to simplify your numbers and keep those weights relatively low.
That's very interesting. This is a broader question. What do you think is the biggest limiting factor with the Jigsaw system? What would you like to see addressed the most?
Oh, I mean, there's a few things. Problem is a strong word. I am a big Mojang supporter. I'm a big fan of the tools that they have provided us and how receptive they are to just opening things up for data packs. Obviously, that's the whole reason that, frankly, we're all here. So I wouldn't say there are problems that need to be resolved. There are some nice to haves that obviously would be great to start to see as they expand the structure system. The big one, of course, being a more intuitive way to control and guarantee limited structure spawns and portals, for example. And then the other one probably would be more control on an individual piece level, on an individual template pool element level. How and whether pieces have terrain adaptation applied to them. Right now, terrain adaptation, which is often also referred to as like bearding, helps blend structures in with the terrain a little bit, whether it's underground or on the surface. You'll see this most often in villages in like hilly areas. They carve away terrain or add a little bit more. That is on a per structure as a whole basis, not a per structure piece basis, sort of. And so just more kind of control over that on a per structure piece basis would be awesome.
Cool. Do placement features like trees need to fit inside the bounds of the jigsaw in order to generate, or are those a separate thing?
No, so that's the great thing, like I mentioned earlier, because the jigsaw pool element has an implicit bounding box of 1 by 1 by 1. Doesn't matter how big the feature that actually gets generated is. It doesn't care about bounding boxes at all. So trees are a great example of not needing to be concerned about that. Obviously, you still need to obey the rules of how trees get placed to ensure that it's able to successfully generate, but that's on the feature side, not the bounding box side. And another great example of like applying this is for if you're making, like I have a custom nether fortress, you can use block column features with jigsaw blocks that are at the bottom of the bridges to then place the pillars all the way down to mimic how nether fortresses generate without needing those to worry about bounding boxes, worry about size limits of the structure as well. Because they're all going to technically have 1 by 1 bounding boxes.
Interesting. How many structures do you use for, or how many structure pieces do you like to use for medium-sized structures like villages? I feel like you do talk about some of these in your videos, like you
Yeah.
showcase your whole structure set, but
Okay. I mean, I would say it varies. It depends on the needs of that particular structure. For villages, I would estimate it probably tends to be only about like, I mean, 20 or so different types of pieces. There might not be very many variants for something like a village because, you're going to have like maybe 10 to 12 different buildings of houses and blacksmiths and churches and things. And then you're going to have, 2 to 5 types of roads, a few road decorations, a farm, maybe a couple sizes of farms. And so that starts to add up to, roughly 20 or so. But a village is, I would say, a very specific type of thing. A medium-sized structure like my Plains Temple, for example, has certainly a lot more because I very intentionally wanted a lot more variety. Even though it's technically all one building, there's a lot more different types of pieces that can be used for each of the different kind of segments of that building. And so, that might go as high as, I haven't counted, but, could be 30 or 40 or 50.
can entities like mobs be saved in child rooms slash placement features?
Absolutely, yeah. That's just like a setting in the structure block. So that's just a matter of whether you saved it with entities on or off. The important thing to remember there, and this doesn't come up very often, but it's like an edge case that's useful to know. Things like marker entities, item displays, these can be saved in structure files, but because they have no bounding box, like a zombie or even like a player does if you press F3 plus B. If you place them on the very border of a structure's bounding box, it's not going to save inside of it. It does need to be at least a little bit inside of the bounding box of the structure in order to be saved, because otherwise it's not going to be picked up because it doesn't have a bounding box of its own.
Good trick. This might be specific to you. Will you release the Cave World Dwarf Hollow?
Right now, I would say that the Dwarf Hollow is at a little bit of a standstill. I don't feel like it is feature complete, but I also am struggling to ideate and come up with what I would want from it in order to be complete. And so I don't feel comfortable releasing it in any public state. I don't necessarily need things to be like fully 100% complete. But I do want them to be in a state that I consider satisfying to play. And right now, it isn't, in my opinion.
How does the spawning stuff work for the obsidian pillars in the end?
So those are actually features, not structures. They are a hard-coded feature type, and the way that they are placed in the dimension is a little bit strange. So technically, you're able to place them with like fixed coordinates. There's a placement modifier that does that, or rather, I think it's part of the feature itself. Vanilla technically doesn't use that mechanic of the obsidian pillars feature because they're slightly more hard-coded for the end pillars in specific, so that particularly they work and function as expected for respawning the Ender Dragon.
Just a couple last questions, and then we'll wrap this up. Is there a way to ensure a parent room only spawns if the child is able to successfully spawn?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. Oh, no, I don't think so. I mean, like, technically no, I don't think there would be any way to do that. There's probably like some really weird, crazy tricks. So, like, I see some confusion in the chat. As an example, say you want a portal room to be mostly guaranteed in a stronghold, but you're okay with there not being a portal room. But if there is a portal room, you want it to connect directly to a library beforehand. And if there is no portal room, you don't want that library. That's obviously not representative of vanilla stronghold generation, but a useful example, an illustrative example. And I don't believe there would be any reasonable way, at least, to be able to do that. That would be pretty tough, I would say. Interesting question. Good one.
Yeah, sort of a thought experiment. All right, just one last question here. You have a lot of world gen and structure videos. Are there any specific videos or maybe parts of videos you think would be a good supplement as like further reading to maybe dive a bit more into like advanced jigsaws?
All of the biome strongholds videos are where I would say I utilize these most to the greatest degree, and specifically with regards to guaranteed structure pieces, since obviously trying to make custom strongholds, my goal is to have the end portal room be guaranteed. And so I explain in much more detail how I'm doing that. I introduced the concept of like naming structure variants or particular like types of structure variants, complexes to represent how they get utilized in the space. And I try to go into much more detail. Obviously, the visual element helps a lot into how I am making those chains of guaranteed pieces work.
Cool. So so you would say your biome strongholds overall.
Yeah.
I think I linked the playlist, but maybe I didn't. Well, cool. We got through all the questions. We're at the hour. But before we close, is there anything else you want to leave us off with?
No, I really appreciate being able to talk about pretty advanced stuff, I would say, and pretty technical, specific stuff. It was great to see how many people actually showed up for this. I was expecting a much smaller crowd, so this was really great. And yeah, I'm sorry that I didn't have necessarily as many visuals as I was planning, but I hope you enjoyed the fun theme. And yes, like I mentioned in the previous slide, play blueprints.
For sure. Well, thank you, Kano, for presenting advanced jigsaw structures in the pink prints. If you'd like to see Kano's booth, it's in the Patch Plateaus. And there's also the related locked out booth that's right next door. This will be all for today. Thanks everyone for joining us, and we'll see you at future events. Please check the Smith Summit schedule on the website if you'd like to see what else we have going on. Take care, everyone.